Making a good whole wheat bread at home can be challenging, but in this video, I'll show you how to make one that's so soft and fluffy that you'll eat the entire loaf and still believe it's good for you. In the bottom of a large bowl, I'm gonna add 6 grams of salt, followed by 20 grams of granulated sugar. Then, 100 grams of bread or all-purpose flour, followed by 250 grams of whole wheat flour. After that, you need to stir to combine all the dry ingredients. Now I make a well in this mixture because I've heard that otherwise the bread might explode in the oven, and add 15 grams of olive oil, followed by an egg, which can be cold or at room temperature, it doesn't matter. The egg also helps the texture of the whole wheat bread, and then 200 grams of warm whole milk. If you have problems knowing if the milk is warm, add the cold milk into a pan and turn the heat on low. Then dip your finger, preferably clean, and stir the milk with it. Don't worry, you won't get burned. You'll feel it as soon as the milk is slightly warm and ready to use. For this bread, I'm going to use fresh yeast, but in the description you can find out how much instant dry yeast or sourdough starter to use instead. On top of the milk, I break a cube of 15 grams of fresh yeast, and I recommend that you use fresh if possible because it's much better than dry yeast, but if you are using dry, you would add it in the same order and place. And then, with a fork, I start mixing these ingredients. I usually start mixing all bread doughs with a fork because it's much better than a spoon and because using my hand at this point would make too much of a mess. After mixing, you'll end up with a very soft dough, but don't be scared, it's necessary to get a soft and airy bread. Now I'm going to talk about my little friend, the bench scraper, which is a very useful tool to deal with high hydration doughs such as this one. If you want to learn how to bake bread with me, you need one of these. With the help of the scraper, I dump everything onto a clean, flour-free counter. Now I'm going to knead the dough using just my fingertips. My technique is to take the dough and fold it back on itself a few times, then rotate it 180 degrees and repeat the folds. First you fold the dough once, fold it again, turn it, and repeat it all over again. This procedure will develop the gluten present in the flours, and this will give us a soft and airy bread. It's very important that you don't add any flour while kneading this bread, as the amounts are exact, and if you add more flour, you'll get a different bread from the one I'm showing you. Nevertheless, if you panic and feel like throwing the dough in the trash, washing your hands and squatting under the shower, sobbing as the water falls on your head, you can add more flour. From time to time, I use the scraper to gather all the dough and continue kneading. After kneading it for a few minutes, and when you slap the dough and your hand is almost clean like this, it's time to stop. The dough may not seem very elastic, but it is. It's the gluten that's responsible for the dough behaving like this, looking like glue. And these little pieces of whole wheat flour are what make it difficult to make a whole wheat bread without adding white flour, as they break the gluten network, which prevents a good bread growth. After a certain amount of brutality, I cover the dough with a bowl and let it rest for 5 minutes. This rest will rest the dough and the gluten network, and we can see this by doing the window pane test. See how the dough allows itself to be stretched now? Do you remember how easily it ripped before? With the scraper, I collect all the dough and reinforce the gluten network with a very traditional technique called slap and fold, which works like this. You lift the bowl of dough, throw it against the surface, fold the dough forward, rotate, pick the dough again, throw it against the surface, and continue. Again with the scraper, I give the ball of dough a little more tension, and this works as a kind of kneading. Don't worry if you can't do this or get the dough into a tight ball like this, practice makes perfect. Done that, I put the dough in a square plastic box with high walls. This makes monitoring the fermentation volume much easier than if I use the same round bowl I made the original mix in. I press the dough well against the bottom of the box, and with a marker, I make a mark that signals where the dough was in the beginning and where I want it to end up. In this case, I want it to almost triple in volume. Afterwards, I cover it and put it in the oven with only the light on for the initial fermentation. This process, while not essential and often not followed in bakeries, helps the bread taste and texture, as more gluten bonds are forming during this rest. In my case, this fermentation took about 1 hour and 15 minutes, but each case is different. Now I put some flour on the surface, degas the dough, and put it on a floured surface. After sprinkling some flour on top as well, I start pressing the dough against the surface to get a rectangle. This process removes the fermentation gases and makes the yeast come into contact again with the sugars present in the dough, which serve as food for it, and that's why the bread inflates again. Removing gases also aligns the gluten strands in addition to providing a greater bread expansion. Once I've got a rectangle of dough, I roll it up like a rug, squeezing it in with my fingers as I go. This also helps the bread to have a better rise in the oven as it strengthens the gluten. When the loaf is shaped, it's time to transfer it to a greased mold and then press the dough well against the mold. This will ensure that the bread rises evenly. If I left it as it was, the bread would be taller in the middle than at the extremities. Since my bread pan has a lid, I covered with it, but if yours doesn't have one, place a damp cloth on top. This bread needs to ferment for about 20 to 30 minutes in the oven with the light on. After that time, I remove from the oven and start heating it up for 15 minutes at 200 degrees Celsius, 400 degrees Freedom. In my case, I removed the lid, covered it with a cloth, and let it continue fermenting on top of the oven as it's being heated. To know if the bread is ready to bake, if you press lightly on the bread with your finger and the mark returns only halfway, as is the case, the bread is ready to bake. So I put the bread in the oven and immediately turned the temperature down to 180 degrees Celsius, 350 degrees Freedom, and baked for about 45 minutes. But every oven is different, so you need to keep an eye on it. When the bread fills your house with a wonderful aroma, it's a sign that it's almost ready. After baking, I wait about 5 minutes and I hit the pan a few times to free the bread from the grips of the hot metal prison where it was, and put it on a rack so that the bottom doesn't get wet while it cools. But if you don't have one of these, you can place the bread directly on the rack of the turned off oven. Just keep the oven door open, otherwise the bread will dry out too much. I know it's difficult, but you must let the bread cool completely before slicing it. When cool, keep the loaf in a sealable bag at room temperature or freeze it. I'm sure that if you made it this far, besides being a wonderful person who deserves the most wonderful things in life, you know that you can use a sandwich bread to make a sandwich, and even more certainly, you must know how to make a sandwich with your favorite fillings. So I didn't bother. I ate the bread plain because it was late at night and I was sleepy. This recipe yields 1 loaf of bread, but if you want 2, just multiply all the ingredients by 2 with the exception of the yeast. It can stay as it is. But anyway, that's all for now. Thanks for watching. We'll see each other in the next video. Bye.